Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Lee Bucher. I am the Director of Product Marketing at Arena Solutions, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I'd like to now introduce our great panel lineup for today. We have joining with us 3 customers. We have Tony Byros, Director of Global Documentation and Training Compliance at Insulet, Cindy Lalowski, Senior Quality Systems Manager at AI, Christine Pompa, Director of Quality Assurance at Imagine, and finally, George Lewis, who is Arena's Vice President of Business Development and Strategy, who will be chatting with our panelists today and leading them through the discussion. I'm going to pass the mic over to George to kick off today's discussion. So George, you are on.
Great. Thank you, Heather Lee. So these are unusual times, and they're certainly challenging the way we work. You know, supply chains have been disrupted around the world, testing our ability to allocate and produce goods on time. Quality issues are as costly as ever, yet they're far more difficult to triage and resolve virtually. And how can our product teams make decisions to design, develop, test, and manufacture new products when we can't come together and meet face-to-face? In this uncertain environment, it's become necessary to reimagine how we communicate and collaborate in every aspect of our business. Today, we're continuing our series of events to help you navigate these uncharted waters. We'll be sharing knowledge and best practices gained working with you over the last 20 years. In some events, like our April event, you'll be hearing from Arena subject matter experts. In other events like today's, you'll hear from other Arena customers. And we'll ask to help you inform each discussion by participating in live polls and discussion threads within the Arena Events app. To help with the discussion, we're going to launch a live poll now. We want to get a sense of how everyone is working together to make decisions now that we're all virtual. If you're tuning in from a web browser, you should now see the poll question on the right side of your screen. If you're joining us from the Arena Events mobile app, look for the live poll option right below our video feed. And so poll question 1 is, what's been your biggest change control challenge? Take a moment to complete the poll now, and we'll circle back to discuss it here shortly. But moving ahead, if you joined us for our first event in April, you saw this slide. We wanted to share it again for all of you who missed it at that event, or maybe missed the event in general. We think it provides a great snapshot of how much our work lives have changed. In March, we asked you, our customers, to tell us before 2020 and now. Not surprisingly, you told us how your work has almost flipped completely. Going from mostly in the office to almost virtual 100% of the time. This isn't the only reason we're having this series of events, but we do believe that whatever the future of product work is, it won't be what it was before for most of us. Okay, so let's hear from our panel. The first question I've got for the group here is, let's start with the idea of a perfect process. Many teams get stuck early trying to build the perfect process, but put every possible decision branch and detail into the process all at once, roll it out to the team, and expect everything to be there on day one. Is this a reasonable goal, or in your experience, is it best to begin with a simple process and then build them up, or use some sort of ad hoc approach where you build up the change control board as needed? Christine, why don't we start with you? Any thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, thanks, George. It is so funny that you bring up this notion of perfection. I just attended a webinar on continuous improvement, and they actually mentioned the French proverb, perfect is the enemy of the good. I won't even try to pronounce the French version. Anyways, we learned this firsthand at Imagine here, and I could think of one particular example. So when we went to go launch our commercial part number control process in Arena, we set it up as one single routing. So all functions, one routing, they would review and approve at the same time, and off we went. Now, as we moved through the process, we found that one particular group was actually using that information before the entire group reviewed the details. Now, as you can imagine, when you do a review of a bunch of different people, sometimes those details need to be changed and modified before you actually release the item. Well, it actually created a pain point for them because they would have to go back and fix their inputs 2 and 3 times based on the group's feedback. So we actually set it up so that that particular group would be the second stage of the approval process, and that way they would have all the accurate details at the first point of entry. It really saved them a lot of mistakes and a lot of headaches, and it helped resolve a lot of confusion. I like to think about it as, you don't know what you don't know, and if you wait to know everything, you're really never going to get there.
That's great input, Christine. Appreciate the feedback. Tony, any thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, when I started at Insulet, the main job was to convert us from a paper system to an electronic system. So we were 100% paper. And I believe the most important step when implementing a process or a system, entire PLM system, is the sell. I spent the better part of a year just selling PLM around the whole organization, what it can do for us, what it can help us with, what it can fix, what it might not fix. The whole thing was to drum up excitement for the system before we even selected the PLM system. And I think that I'm a huge, I feel that another important step is bringing people in at a very early stage when defining or developing or designing a process. I'm a huge proponent of including all stakeholders at a very early stage, because I feel like you get that emotional buy-in as you're developing the process, because everybody's involved from the get-go. And, I think there's huge danger in not including stakeholders at a very early stage. I have been part of implementations where the whole system is designed, developed, and almost ready to be rolled out, and the stakeholders are brought in at a very late stage of the game. And they get blindsided by it. They haven't emotionally bought into it, and most of the time they fight it. So I feel like that emotional buy-in is so, so important. And you just make everybody feel included in the solution all along, and they buy into it. And they end up selling the system all across the organization for you. So I've even noticed that with the success of the system and including everybody, that some of the biggest opponents of the system are the biggest proponents of the system now. They're off asking, what else can we bring into the system, move from paper to electronic? Can we bring it all in? Can we just do everything in Arena? So I think that is one of the most important steps is the buy-in and the sell.
That's great input, Tony. I mean, I've heard it as well, where emotional buy-in is key. In fact, some of those individuals that would resist, deploying the solution perhaps initially are now eager to get the new workflows mapped into the solution as soon as possible. So that's very encouraging. Cindy, from your perspective, anything to add here?
So actually, I haven't used a paper-based system since the 90s, so I'm well-versed in using Arena. I've used Arena almost since it was rolled out. And I think really, as Tony said, working with, and Christine, working with everybody to get it set up and put in place. From the get-go, we have some employees who have never used this type of system, and they just love it. They've come up to speed very well. So I think really spending the time up front, educating, training everybody how to use the system is very helpful. I agree with Tony, getting their buy-in. And sometimes you're not going to get that with everybody, but it's pretty easy when, hey, that's the process, you need to use it. We process changes really quickly, so it is very well and very widely accepted at AI, and that's pretty much it.
No, that's great feedback, Cindy, and our other panelists as well. I mean, I think it's all really good input for all the Arena customers to hear on how you're all doing things at your organizations. So let's take a look at the poll that everybody just responded to. The question was, what's been your biggest change control challenge? Okay, interesting. So the most popular answer is ensuring people do their work in the process, closely followed by building a strong, perfect process. So we actually had talked about some of these already as part of the discussion so far, but I think we can certainly kind of tilt our discussion a little bit to include a little bit more on ensuring people do work in the process. We actually have a couple questions on that specifically, so that's really good feedback. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so topic 2. We know that most of us are living in an information overload situation, both at work and in our personal lives. I don't know about you, but my email inboxes, that's plural, are often out of control. And for change and design review processes, getting past any overload, getting people's attention and participation is important. This dovetails right into that poll we had just asked. How do you build processes that get people's attention and can scale as rate complexity increases along with unexpected shifts, like moving to virtual, like happened to all of us recently? Cindy, you want to take the lead on this one?
Sure, be happy to. So I think that when you build in a process and everybody gets used to that process, it flows very well. One of the processes that we have in place is that we've built in approval roles and routings for certain types of changes. And we get everybody's buy-in in terms of which routings they need to be included in. We also don't like to babysit the process, so to speak. So when you just, submit a change, it's out there, it sits. There's always those 1 or 2 CCB members that, oh, I forgot, or oh, I didn't see that one. Well, we use the approval deadline. And so our normal process flow is 72 hours. And our urgent process flow is 24 hours. And yes, for the urgents, we have to send a separate email, walk over and talk to the person, give them a text or a phone call, because we normally have our suppliers or our contract manufacturers waiting to receive that change. So everybody knows that they need to approve within the allotted time frame. If they don't, they're supposed to contact us and let us know that they need additional time. So to enforce that, we've used the system, and we just simply let the change reject. We let it auto reject. And then, as everybody knows, the way it works, it has to go back and get resubmitted, and everybody has to reapprove. So that helps to reinforce the process, which I really like. Then we don't have to babysit. We also are involved heavily with onboarding and offboarding. So when a new person comes in, we ensure that they are trained. We ask their manager if they need to be included in certain types of changes for either approval or optional for information only. And then we also, for offboarding, if an employee leaves the company, we go back and we talk to that person's manager to ensure that we have the appropriate approval roles covered. Since we're an automotive company, we have a safety officer that needs to approve certain types of changes. So we work really closely with that person as well. That's about it.
That's great. Nope, I love your self-correcting workflow, Sydney. That's fantastic. Anything that makes things more proactive and really puts the onus on the users to get their job done, I think is critical. So well done on that. Christina, how are you tackling Imagine from the standpoint of getting people to participate in workflows and keeping everybody engaged?
So we actually use a similar type of enforcement as Cindy when we process our customer purchase order review. So a 48-hour deadline, and then the change administrator starts the follow-up process to make sure that everyone reviews and approves it. And for the most part, we're pretty good. We actually have encouraged our employees to use their dashboard in order to help manage their workload and get done what needs to get done in a timely manner. We actually spend about an hour with our employees when they come on board to get them familiar with Arena and with their dashboard. We help them to try to understand, how to manage their assignments and get things done when they need to get them done. Some people still prefer to use emails to manage their workload, but we found if we introduce them to dashboard, it could open up another way to work. So between those two controls, we think we put in some pretty good systems, and it seems to work really good for us.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, having a dashboard configured to kind of be their mission control when they log in and everything is right there in front of them really makes a lot of sense. Follow-on question for you, Christine. Fostering shared understanding across teams, how do you get appropriate participation across teams, including those that don't necessarily author or drive changes actively, right? How do you know you need their input, and how do you pull them into the system when they're not really an active participant?
Yeah, absolutely. So to help facilitate communication, we actually use the comments only or optional approval a whole lot in our systems to help certain functions stay informed, but not necessarily hold up the change. And it works really well in our purchasing department when we have a customer order that we enter that's deal rated for a government contract. In other words, it has to come up above all other orders when we put it into the system. So purchasing gets an alert and a flag that they understand that they need to get these raw materials on order right away, possibly move them up, and try to get them, in-house and using or, available for use to try to meet customer satisfaction. And it really has been a great way that we found to use Arena to help get everyone on board and on the same page communication-wise.
Tony, I'd be curious to hear your input on how you're doing things at Insulet.
Yeah, we actually include all affected groups in the change control board, and I think this prevents surprises to some groups. To give you an example, Insulet, prior to a year ago when we built our world-class manufacturing center, it's actually all automated. We were 100% contract manufactured. So when we had ECOs, we would typically get them approved by the manufacturing engineering department, who would typically correspond with our CMs. Well, so we went along that way, but then as we were developing the automated manufacturing site, we have a new group called automation engineering. And some of the first changes that went through actually affected the automation, and they weren't aware of it. So we actually brought them into the change control board, because even though you're making a change to the product, this may also make it affect the automation equipment itself. So it's very important for us to include all affected departments so that our product and our engineering teams, as well as our automation engineering teams, are all on board with the change.
Cindy, what's your perspective on it? You may be muted. Yeah, it looks like you're muted. There you go.
Okay, I'm back. So in terms of getting everybody to buy in, we do the same thing. We use optional and we use comments only. Since our company is pretty small, we kind of know how everybody fits in, and we ad hoc. Approvers, it could be comments only as needed, because we always pretty much know who we need to add in there.
Any additional thoughts from Tony, perhaps? Christine?
So I talked a lot about selling PLM, and one of the things that I always tell people is that PLM does not take the place of human interaction. Conversations still have to take place. For example, ECO originators should always have conversations with approvers as they're formulating their change order packages. This way, when it gets to the approval stage, it's almost like a rubber stamp. The approvers know what's coming, the ECO originators have already explained everything to them, and you're not, using the system to eliminate human interaction.
Tony, I agree with you 100%. So human conversations are good and really, really necessary, but I still think they should be brought back to the PLM as a product record. Scribe is one way we're using to communicate remotely and still have a conversation. So we actually started it to help supplement the face-to-face conversations that aren't taking place while people are out, especially with tickets. I use tickets to track my quality engineer and my system analyst projects. And it's really a great way to help have a conversation regarding what's going on with the project, but still include the stakeholder in the dialogue. And I really love that the data is kept as a record. And you can refer back to that whenever you want. You know, it's really nice, and it helps create a history of what went on with that item or change or ticket and where it's been through its entire life. So I really like that.
I totally agree, Christine. Having the history is so important. You know, often people say PLM has everything messed up, but no, PLM is just highlighting the sins of the past.
Yeah,
that's great.
Go back to review it. Absolutely.
So let me interject too. I think that one of the great things about Arena and going through the online approval process is the ability for the CCB members to add their comments. And we have the different stages. So document control is always the last stage. And we go through, a lot of people will sometimes make a comment and they'll approve. But what it allows you to do as being the last stage approval is to go back and address those comments and make sure that if you determine that that comment is something that needs to be addressed before you actually release that change, it allows, the system allows for you to do that. And sometimes, yes, you do have to take that offline. You can do that via, you know, having a meeting. Right now, that would be a Zoom meeting, wouldn't it? Or something like that. And, you know, when you're in the office, it's nice because you can just walk around and, you know, talk to people. And I do agree that that human interaction is really a good thing to do. In the time that I've been at AI, we've only had to have a couple of meetings, and those were mostly to discuss inventory disposition. So I agree that there are times that you do need to actually have a meeting to get a change processed.
Really great discussion, everybody. That's all spot on. I think it's super helpful for everybody on the call here today. So great stuff. So we'd like to do another poll as we shift to talk about 2020 and beyond. As a reminder, you should see the poll question on the right side of your screen if you're joining in via web browser. If you're joining us from the Arena Events mobile app, look for the live poll option right below our video feed. And so the second question is how has your decision-making been impacted in 2020? And again, I'll let you respond to that. We'll come back and take a look at the responses here after we get through another question for the panel. Okay, so panel question number 3. Pandemic related, what impact have current events had on your change control boards or design review teams? Have there been any changes in volume, or they need to conduct additional meetings like virtual meetings like Zoom? Cindy, you actually mentioned that just previously that you hop on Zoom to discuss inventory disposition here or there. Any additional thoughts on additional virtual meetings needed or anything like that for your organization?
So not really. As I mentioned, we process quite a few changes. We're in the design and development stage on our product, and moving along and documenting all of our test cases and everything that we need to document. But this really hasn't changed our processes, the way we conduct business at all. Everything is just pretty much status quo for us.
And Christine, how about for you? I mean, you're an essential business, correct?
Yep, yeah, we are. We're actually an essential business, but being located in New York, we're really trying to support the pause order in order to keep everyone safe and healthy. So a lot of our office personnel are working from home at least a few days a week. We're trying to switch on and off. So our engineers and our salespeople and some of our support staff. And it's really, it's caused us to rely more heavily on virtual meetings. But we really haven't seen a change in the number of changes that we're processing or any sort of type of lag in our timing of processing changes. So that's a good thing. We're happy about that.
Yeah, no, that's great for Imagine there. Tony, what's your perspective on it?
So luckily, we had just implemented PLM about a year ago, so our processes have not necessarily changed due to the current situation. But we are definitely glad we implemented PLM when we did, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, what would it be like if we had hit the current events and you're still on paper, Tony? Could you have made it work?
I can envision how that would be, and it definitely wouldn't work.
Yeah, there's still so many organizations running on paper these days, and the ability to adapt to, you know, the changing environment would be nearly impossible on paper. That'd be very tough for an organization. Okay, so moving on to the second poll's results, we asked you how 2020 has impacted your team's decision making. Let's take a look at what you all thought. Oh, interesting. We have a pretty good split here, although discovering process gaps or limitations is the leading subject here. So interesting. Yeah, I could see how that could be the case where, you know, not having the process fully developed in your solution might expose some of the holes in it, or especially where everybody's virtual, might make it a little bit more difficult. Hopefully some of the discussion so far can, you know, help give you ways to consider adapting your solution and perhaps using the comments only or some of the other features that our panel have described so far. But great poll, good results. So moving on to the final question for our panel, you know, as veterans in the industry, you know, what could be the new working normal? What do you think your team will take from your experience this year and into the future? How is it going to change the working environment? Tony, why don't you lead off on this one?
So this one's interesting because Insulet just experienced our first medical device single audit program audit, and it was virtual. And it was interesting because it was set up similar to an on-site audit where we had a front room and a back room, and where, you know, the front room processes requests back to the back room fills requests, they send them back to the front room, and you have people preparing to speak to the auditor. Well, the big difference though was that this was on conference call, not video, and we did not have a scribe. And the scribe in the front room, what they do is they scribe the entire audit, everything that's being said to the auditor, everything the auditor is actually saying, and they actually also scribe to the back room, you know, the general feeling of the audit and the body language of the auditor or where the auditor might be going. So it was just very interesting to see the different dynamic about like what our current situation has done to even just audits. So I mean, I think that the auditors are learning with us, you know what I mean? So it was just a big learning experience for the company being audited, but also the auditors, you know, not being in that face-to-face interaction. You know, I feel like, you know, everybody's going to learn from this in general, and a lot of processes are going to be in a make it or break it situation after this, right? So some companies are going to find that working from home works well, and they're going to, you know, have less overhead with office space, and some companies might find that, you know, they really need the people in the office. So I think things are going to change, you know, some for better, some for worse after this.
That makes a lot of sense, Tony. Yeah, I think we're all adapting and certainly trying to figure it all out, you know, as we go. Christine, how's the impact been, or how do you perceive the impact will be at Imagine in the coming weeks and months?
So I think that this whole experience has taught us that, you know, we can be more flexible in our work environment and still get what needs to be done complete. As we move out of this pandemic, it seems like there's going to be a whole lot more virtual discussions and opportunities to share information in a manner that really wasn't well received before. I'm thinking now, just like Tony, specifically of quality audits like supplier audits, inter audits, third-party audits, customer audits. I think that people are getting used to this new normal. And although face-to-face meetings are important to get everyone on board, I think that people are going to start supplementing them with virtual meetings and discussions. And what I really like about it is having all of your data in one repository really helps the process of sharing information digitally. And I think it helps manage time efficiently and effectively in these meetings. And I think it's really going to be key as we move forward and move on from this situation.
Yeah, having that baseline to work off of, so everybody's working off the cliche term, single version of the truth, as we've always talked about in PLM, certainly becomes critical as everybody's virtual. Cindy, how do you think things will change for AI? Any notable trends that you're seeing?
So not really. We were scheduled to go through our ISO 9001 external audit, but that didn't happen because of the pandemic. So we've pushed that out. It'll probably be June, July before we get back to that. But for our internal audits, we will be conducting, I would say, 90% of those via Zoom. What I really like about using Arena is that we use different modules. So we have our training module. All of our training records are in Arena. We also use the projects module. So for an automotive company in the projects module, we have what's called APQP. So it's basically a checklist at the different phase gates of the product that you go through. And so the phase gates are signed off actually in the projects module. So when we get to the design and development portion of that, all of the information is right there in Arena. We use the quality module. Again, all of the information is right there in Arena. So I really like that we're going to be able to do a lot of our audits in a virtual manner. When I was talking with the external auditor, they are actually going to be moving in that manner as well. So they'll be offering virtual audits, which, as we all know, that hey, that's going to cut down cost for us as a customer. So that'll work out really well. We won't have to pay for their travel and etc. So I think that the change is going to be good for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly forcing us all to work in entirely new ways, right? I'm not here at the Arena office, despite the fact that it perhaps may look that way. We're figuring out all of bells and whistles and Zoom and WebEx and all those other tools and figuring out new ways to work. So right. I think flexibility is a theme that I've heard from other, business executives as well. In a recent conversation with Arena's CTO, I was asking him how his team was doing, since they're typically in the office, and he felt the previous requirement of being in the office for 4 days a week may be proven to be outdated. To be determined, but his team's getting a lot done in the virtual work environment, and certainly in the foreseeable future, the need to head into an office is curtailed or greatly changed if you are headed in. But looking beyond the pandemic, it's hard to believe that the same assumptions about working location and even corporate real estate decisions will ever be the same. So. Okay, well, that wraps up the panel discussion. We've had a great time sharing with you today. We encourage you to stay for a few minutes of Q&A. We do have some questions in the queue here. We also have some fantastic swag to give away, some really cool stuff. I hope it was useful to learn how other customers are using Arena during these uncertain times. And I hope you picked up a few tips and tricks that'll help your virtual work teams more efficiently within Arena. In the Arena Events app, we've uploaded the second in a series of resource guides for your reference. It's called Getting to Milestones, and it outlines the good, better, and best practice of collaborating with your teams to drive the right decisions and the timelines you need. You can find it on the Arena Events site or in the app under this session, and also under the resources section. Okay, so with that, let's move into the Q&A portion of today's event. You can submit your own questions using the Ask a Question area or upvote a question that someone else has already asked. Votes help us to prioritize the questions in case we don't get to them all. And if we don't get to your question today, don't fret. We'll follow up with you on them. We'll follow up with you on your question on the Arena Events discussion area, and also one-on-one if potentially needed. So let me take a look at the questions here. A popular one here that's got a couple of votes is, can anyone give examples of how they've used Arena to better improve communications with suppliers working remotely during this pandemic? Any one of you three want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. So we're actually looking at drawing our suppliers into our workspace through supplier corrective actions in the quality world. So right now we've been using it where we're finding it challenging when contacting our suppliers when we have getting a hold of them when we have an issue. Up until this point, we've really been asking our suppliers to complete a form and then uploading it into Arena in a quality template for peer review. And it's really caused us now to start looking at a process where we can have our suppliers provide root cause and corrective action right into our system rather than having it upload through a form. So it's really quite an exciting project for us, and I'm really looking forward to getting it launched and settled up and working.
Great, thanks, Christine. So another question here, does anybody use projects to drive completion, release, and implementation of ECOs?
Yeah, we actually do at Insulet. We call it the closed loop ECO process. And basically the way that works is the change administrator will initiate the project, and based on what is happening with the ECO and how some of the questions have been answered in the disposition, they will initiate tasks and assign them out to the different groups, to carry out rework or scrap or so on and so forth. It hasn't been a perfectly smooth process, but it has been working. We recently have been just struggling a little bit with knowing who exactly to assign for each task, but we're ironing out those details. We've had actually a few meetings over the last week to iron some of that out, and we're very hopeful that it's going to work really well for us.
That's great. Yeah, that's a clever use of the project tool. Probably gives you more robust capability of tracking the implementation side of the change order.
For sure. I mean, there were concerns before that to make sure that scraps were carried out and, inventory was removed out of quarantine or whatever. And we developed this process to ensure that each task is carried out and closed out and confirmed, and there's actually history around it.
That's great, Tony. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So another question here, I'd like to know how we have used the closed loop change management through Arena. Let's see. I don't think I read that right. I would like to know how we can use closed loop change management in Arena. I think that's kind of the point of the question here.
So I can take
Cindy,
that
any
one.
thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So actually what I really like about the change control function is that when you release it, when you approve and release a change, you always have your inventory disposition completed before anyone even approves the change. But you have that implementation tab, and we use that implementation tab. So if there's rework or scrap, we always change the status to in process. If we have something that's rework or scrap, we go into the quality module and we use a non-conforming material report, so the NCMR template. So we create an NCMR. Another thing I really like about Arena too is that everything is so interrelated. You can go on the NCMR tab, you look at the, you can connect it to the item that you're scrapping or reworking. You can connect the ECO. So all the information is right there. It's on the NCMR, it's in the ECO, and it's on the item. So it's just all right there. So we do follow up. We actually have another group, the purchasing group or planning group, moves the material from stock or whatever location it is into MRB for scrap disposition or for rework. So we always follow up with the NCMR and make sure that the rework has been done, and then we close out the ECO. So that's really the closed loop. You know, if you're releasing something, it's just a straight release, you're done. But if you're reworking, scrapping, or any other type of material disposition, we use that implementation tab to close it out.
That's really funny because we use the implementation tab also a whole lot, but really we use it when we move from a temporary change to a permanent change. So we actually create a report that our engineers provide via peer review. And once the report has been accepted, we'll put that report into the implementations tab as a file. So that way anybody can go back and review that report to see exactly why and how we made the decision to convert it to a ECN. So that's kind of how we use it. And it works really well in our process because then you have that record of what justified moving it from a temporary change to a permanent change.
So Insulet has been considering some strategy in a different direction, and that is the use of change requests. So we've been actually talking a lot about using the change request process to manage our change development planning. So basically, conceptual proposals would go through a change request and then approved through you know, a higher level strategy board. And then once approved, that would progress on to the ECO process, and the ECO process would actually take care of the, you know, the more detail of the change, you know, changing the parts and the bombs and everything that would follow on from that higher level conceptual change request.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Tony. You actually dovetailed into the final question here, which was a really popular one. It was just on change requests. You know, do your teams use them, and if so, in what instances? Cindy or Christine, any additional thoughts on the use of a request at all?
Sure. We actually use a change request form as opposed to the request module in Arena. I guess one of the things I don't like about the request module is that the request goes in, you have an evaluator group, but it just sits there. It doesn't progress unless, I guess, you babysit it or somehow force it to do so. I like the concept of having all of the information in the request module because, hey, bam, you just turn it right into an ECO. So that's the one concept that I do like about the request module. And I have used it at in my past companies that I've worked for, but we don't here.
So another interesting use that I've seen with the change request is, I mean, I just described how Insulet has been talking about using change requests, but at other companies, we've developed process with change requests to communicate with contract manufacturers. It was a really slick way of having changes from the contract manufacturers to come into the company and be approved or denied. So if they're approved, they go on to ECO, they make the changes, and then the information gets fed back to the contract manufacturer. Or if it gets rejected, it simply just goes back to the contract manufacturer with a rejection of the proposal.
Very good. One more question to fit in here, and I think this will be the final question for today. An interesting question. Are there any teams or tools that track continuous improvement and change management in Arena? Is it able to assist with that? So I think the nexus of this question is, how does Arena help with continuous improvement in organizations?
So we're actually looking at capturing our continuous improvement projects through the quality module. We haven't set it up, but again, that's something that we're working towards because I think it's really nice to have all of your projects in one place so that you can go back and refer to them each time. And as long as you set it up so that you have the approvals and reviews, I think it would be really good to document that, you know, in Arena.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Christine.